Good morning. I think it's November 7th, 2021. My name is Douglas Griffin, and this is my Sunday school class. Um, Dismiss. We're going through the book of Genesis, and we're in Genesis chapter 43. We started it last week. We'll finish it this week. Um, I like to suggest that we're trying to discover the unbiased word, meaning not influenced by maybe movies we've seen or Sunday school lessons we've heard or cartoons. Sometimes we show up with the scriptures with a preconceived idea in our head of what's going on. I like to go verse by verse by verse by verse straight through so we can read things in context. And a lot of times we discover something we hadn't seen before. Oh, look. Or we see a reason why this is happening is very much connected to what was happening two chapters before. Oh, that's why he said that. When we don't do that, sometimes we can make up a story that's not true. But God is the master storyteller. Everything, the Bible is actually one story. He begins in Genesis and says, here's how I created man in the garden, and we had this great relationship, and then man sinned. And now I'm going to get man, good morning, Susie. Now I'm going to get man back into the garden. But this is how I have to do it. And I'm going to send warnings, but eventually I'm going to choose a people with whom I can demonstrate the benefits of having a relationship. Here's the plus. If you have a relationship with God, I'm going to bless these people and hold them up. Now, on their part, they're going to have to try to have a relationship. They have to try to be obedient. Uh, and that through that people, I'm going to bring the Messiah who will pay the price for that broken relationship. But hopefully you'll see the goodness of having the relationship and you'll imitate, you'll be Christ-like, you'll be Christians also, and you'll want to be a chosen people in part, etc. So, Jax, so there's really one story, and what's interesting in the book of Genesis that we're in, it seems like it's about Joseph, and it's really about Judah. Of the 12 sons that Jacob had, he loved Joseph and felt that Joseph was the chosen one, and he ends up giving him a double portion. He overlooks Judah because Judah came from the wife that he didn't want. Uh, he was tricked into marrying Leah first, and he was bitter about it, not realizing God knew that was happening, and God doesn't allow things to happen to us that He's not permitting, that's not part of His plan. It's like, what? But I got in that car accident. That I get it. I'm saying He doesn't allow it. Doesn't allow it unless He knows He's going to use it as part of His plan. So someone may have been angry and done some crazy thing, but God says, "Well, I'm not going to strike that person dead before they do that dumb thing. I could, uh, but I'm not. I know what they're about to do, and I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it. God's never outsmarted. God never shows up in a situation and goes, oh man, I didn't know that was going to happen. Now what do I do? We do. We show up somewhere and go, oh man, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And we have to, okay, plan B. God doesn't have a plan B. Since He knows in advance what we're going to do, He's never surprised. He makes everything plan A. And so Leah was part of God's plan. She had six kids, and Judah was one of them, the fourth. And the Messiah was going to come through Judah. But Jacob, the father, didn't know that. He's looking at Joseph. And so many commentators are looking at Joseph in this last 4 or 5 chapters. We think it's about Joseph, but this is the story of how Judah was chosen. Why was Judah chosen? What was Judah going to teach his children different than what Joseph taught his children? Because that's the family that we then follow. We follow Judah's family and Judah's family line from then on down through David and Solomon and all those kings, and on down to Ruth and Esther and to Jesus. So he's just saying he's shifting our focus. This is this is what happened. This is what Judah did in this situation that caused him to be chosen. So just to remind ourselves, in Genesis chapter 43, they'd sold Joseph right into slavery in Egypt, thought he was dead. Then there's a famine, and lo and behold, the other 11 brothers are hungry and need food. They leave Benjamin. God doesn't allow, I mean, the father, Jacob, says, I can't let you take Benjamin because I left Joseph in your care and he ended up dead. And I'm not saying you did it, but I'm not going to let you take Benjamin. So 10 brothers go down. Joseph sees them bowing down. And because Joseph is committed to Egypt, Joseph, like, I'm in Egypt now. In fact, he names his kids, God has helped me forget um, my father's house. His name, Manasseh. He's helped me forget my father's house. And the other one, Ephraim, which means God is blessing me in the land of my affliction. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be. God's blessing me here. So he's let go of ever going back at this point. He's let go of ever going back. Uh, so when he sees his brothers bowing down and remembers the dream, he goes, oh, this is why God showed me that dream. They were going to bow down to me in Egypt, and I get to punish them for what they did. And he does. He scares them and threatens them. But they mention, we've got a father, we've got a brother, and he doesn't know if he believes them. So he has sent, if you really have that brother alive, because they could be lying. They fooled him once, really big time, when he came to say, "Hi, I'm here to say," and they grabbed him and threw him in the pit and then sold him off to slavery. So it's like, how can I trust these people? They could be making this up just to get food. So if you really do have a brother, uh, I'm going to send you back, but I'm only going to send 9 of you back. One of you has to stay. Because he's afraid if I send them all, even if there is a brother, they'll never come back. So how will I ever know? So if there is a brother, they'll come back for this one brother, and they'll bring Benjamin, and then maybe I'll find out they're not lying. So you pick the brother. They pick Simeon. It's pretty clear because we know that Simeon initiated. Simeon's all about kill him, because he and Levi initiated the killing of the men who had raped their sister, and so when they say which person deserves to stay, all the brothers vote Simeon. So he's probably was the main instigator of kill Joseph. So they leave. Uh, they're forced to bring their brother back with them because the famine continues. That's God. So last week we read in Genesis chapter 14, verse 13, when they go to Jacob and say, we got to take him back if we want more food. We got to take Benjamin with us. The man said, don't come back unless Benjamin's with you. He says, okay, take your brother also. This is Genesis 43:13. Arise, go back to the man, and may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release your brother and Benjamin. Because who knows? He may grab Benjamin and take him. They just don't know who this guy is. And if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. If God blesses, he blesses. If he doesn't, oh well, who knows what God's going to do. So in verse 15 of Genesis 43, the men took the present. Now, Jacob's all about, if you're going to go see somebody, give him a present, because Jacob absolutely does not trust that God has gone before him. When Jacob was about to see his brother Esau after 20 years, he sent present after present after present, because he doesn't trust that God's going to work it out. I've got to do something, and that's where we are sometimes. If God puts it on your heart, hey, bring a present with you, cool. But if you're doing it because you don't trust God, if you're doing it out of fear, anything we do, when it says God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind, that means he hasn't, when we're afraid and that's why we're doing things, that's not the spirit of God. So he was afraid his brother was going to kill him, and God had already changed Esau's heart years ago. He's afraid that Joseph is going to kill Benjamin. So send present after present after present. That's just what he does, because he didn't know how to trust God. God is still working on Jacob all the way up until the day he dies. He's still working on Jacob, and he's still working on all of us, because we all have things from our past that are still influencing us. So the men took the present that Jacob had said, got to take these presents with you. And Benjamin, this is Genesis 43:15. And they took double money in their hand, and they arose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my home. Now, they're standing in a huge hall, right? I'm calling it a hall, the huge palace. He sees a guy with them, but he's up, on his throne, and there's all these people coming for food. Is that Benjamin? I don't know if that's Benjamin or not. Take them to my house, because I don't get a closer look. I'll be able to actually talk to the person and see, did they just grab somebody and say, this is Benjamin? Because he doesn't know how Benjamin would look 23 years later. He'd know the sound of his voice. We've run into people, and then once they start talking, you go, oh, I remember who you are. But in this hall, he can't personally just go up to Benjamin and stare at him. So take them to my house. He says, take this men to my home, slaughter an animal, make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon. And then the men did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house, but they're afraid to go in. It says, now the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house. Genesis 43:18. Sometimes we are afraid to make that phone call. We're afraid to go on that interview, because we don't know what awaits us. We don't know that God has sent a Joseph ahead of us, but we've all had that experience. You've called up somewhere, and there was somebody who was on your side, an advocate who, you don't know why, but they said, oh, listen, don't worry, I'll work that out for you. And you're thinking, wow, this person, they don't even know me, but look how nice they're being. That's because God has sent a Joseph ahead. He does that to teach us, so that we'll go, oh, God goes ahead of me in everything, so I don't have to have as much anxiety as I do. Now, if we're going someplace that God didn't send us, then yes, have anxiety. But if you feel like God sent you, know that he went before you. He's going to prepare. You don't have to come in defensive and angry and look, and already, because I've seen that. People walk in the door already cussing everybody out because they just know everybody's going to be against them. And you're like, I'm on your side. I don't even know you. I don't know why you're so mad at me already. But sure, you can have, oh, I'm sorry. And we don't have to put ourselves in that position where we're apologizing. If we can walk in with a different attitude, saying, okay, God's prepared the way here. And so I'm just going to walk in normal and not with guns blazing. They came in with gifts in their hand. Well, they wouldn't even go in the door. But I'm telling you, we've all seen it in our lives. You've been before a judge or a lawyer or a doctor or a sales clerk or somebody who, for some reason, has done some nice thing for you that you don't need. Wow, that was so nice. That person gave me that extra this, or I thought I was going to have to really plead for 10 minutes, but turned out it was okay, because God sends Joseph's ahead of us. So the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house. This is all going to work out. And they said, it is because of the money which was just turned in our sacks the first time that we were brought in. I mean, they totally had the wrong story. This person's trying to do something nice for them and said, no, they're bringing us here it's the money. He's bringing us here to put us to jail. He says, so that he may make a case against us and seize us to take us as slaves with our donkeys. Like this is it. We are in trouble. Because he should have just given us money in the hall, in the palace. He brought us to his house so he can accuse us to our face. So when they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house, and said, oh, sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to the encampment after we left that we opened our sacks, and there each of man's money was in the mouth of his sack, and our money in full weight. So we brought it back in our hand. Like we didn't know. We brought it back, and we brought down our other money in our hands to buy food. So we've got the money that you gave us, and we've got double money. So we did not know who put the money in our sacks. It wasn't us. But he said, peace, calm down, be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. Like God's already worked this out. Your God worked it out. The God of the Egyptians, we don't believe in that God, but we've heard about your God, and look what he's done. And that's another reason God would do several of these things, so that word would spread. Look what he's doing with these Israelites. Look how he saved them here and did this for them there. And there's something peculiar about that, because he wants to make other people jealous of, look what's happening there. And again, we're the same way. We're the Israelites now. We're the chosen people. We've been grafted in. If we will trust him and believe in him, then certain circumstances happen to us. So sometimes just so God can deliver us, so people can say, wow, look how they got out of the situation. It doesn't mean you never get in trouble. it doesn't mean that nothing bad ever happens. It means that God delivers us from situations. Daniel didn't do anything wrong to end up in the lion's den. So it's not about, well, you must have done something wrong if you really believe nothing ever bad will ever happen to you. That's not true. And we want to find fault. Look what you must have done something. And we want to, but sometimes God allows a situation. You really didn't do anything, but you're in the situation just so someone says he brought you in so he could bring you out. Just so not other people can look and go, wow, look how that happened for that person. Look how they were blessed. Doesn't mean that's the only way God can do things. You don't have to get in trouble. God has to deliver you, and so you have a testimony. Sometimes God could just bless you, period. But whatever He does, it's to say these people have a peculiar relationship with me, a singular, peculiar meaning different from all other relationships. And don't you want it? Don't you want to have that? And if we're acting in the right way, if we're praising God, if we're singing in prison, then people will see it. If we're complaining in prison and angry and stressed out and crazy, people won't be able to see it. Uh, so so they come into the house and they try to explain, and the steward says, "Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks." I mean, look, God's worked this out for you. Your God is now, I have a God and He has none of these things for me, but you've got a God who seems to be working things out. Because everybody has a God, whether they will believe it or not. Everybody on this earth worships something. They believe in this book has all the answers, but it's not the Bible. Or this man, or this thing, or my intelligence. They worship something. But can their God deliver them? Can their God bless them? Can their God fight their battles, etc.? So our God can. And this guy says, your God is giving you treasures. Then he says, I had your money, which is not an explanation. He doesn't explain, Joseph told me to put it in. He just says, I'm the one who had your money. And again, that's they go, okay, what does that mean? I had your money. And they don't know. And Joseph doesn't want them to know, right? And then he brought Simeon out. So Simeon had been waiting all this time. Simeon's with him. Now this is this week's legal. So the man brought them into Joseph's house and he gave them water and they washed their feet and he gave their donkeys feed. Now, so there's a way that they treat people as custom when somebody comes in your house. It's a way of demonstrating that you are honored to have them in your presence. It's a way of demonstrating that you esteem people higher than yourselves. And so you bring them in, you feed them. Whether they believed it or not, this was the tradition that had been passed down. When someone comes in, it's like, how wonderful of you to grace our home. And so um, those traditions, like that's an Eastern culture tradition, they had kind of slipped off by the time of Jesus's day. I don't know if you remember, but Jesus went to someone's home, a Pharisee's home, and a woman came in, alabaster jar, and she's washing his feet and crying and drying her with his tears. And the Pharisee's very upset about it, like this, because she's a sinner. I mean, she's a known sinner. What's this known sinner doing here? So Jesus turns to Simon Peter and teaches him a lesson, even though he hadn't said it. He gives him the parable about the man who's forgiven a huge debt and the man who's just forgiven 25 cents. And he says, which one is going to be really grateful and love their master? Well, obviously the man who's given the huge debt. He says, exactly. So then he turned to the woman, and because he says, he's forgiven much will love much, or he who perceives that they've been forgiven much will love much. So he turns to, in Luke chapter 7, verse 44, it says, then he turned to the woman, and he says to Simon, so he's looking at the woman, you see this woman? I entered your house, and he's talking about a week ago when they'd been at Simon Peter's house. I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet. But she's washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet. Since the time I came in, you did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman has anointed my feet with fragrant oil. So here I am, the Messiah, and you think I am, but you're too concerned about everybody else and who you're competing with, because at that point, when they went to Simon Peter's house, they had just come out the mountain. And only John, James, and Peter had gone up and seen the whole transfiguration. And now when they came down, all the disciples were arguing about who was the greatest in heaven and how come they got to, big argument. And they went to Peter's house. And Peter's so concerned with everybody else that he didn't welcome Jesus in. And sometimes we can be concerned with all the stuff that we don't need to be concerned about, that we're not uh, esteeming others correctly. And he uses this. He says, therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. It should be therefore she loves much, because in her mind she's a sinner, and that's why she's so in love with God. He says, but to whom little is forgiven in your mind, to whom you think I'm really and fantastic, says the same loves little, because you think I'm not a sinner. I haven't done much. I maybe did this or that, and you don't understand who you are, and so therefore your heart is not as open to other people. Your heart is not as open to allow love to flow through you, because we think so much of ourselves. Jesus is saying, Peter, you're so concerned about, ooh, look how much God used me in this way and God used me in that way, and look what everything that God did for me, and I was up on the hill, that when I came in your house, you were so caught up in how wonderful you were that you didn't realize how horrible you really are. Because if you thought of yourself in that direction, then you love people more. When you see people, you're more grateful, you're more loving toward them, because you don't have this inflated opinion of yourself. You see the homeless person on the street and you think that could have been me. And your heart goes out to them. You see the sick person or the elderly person and you want to do something. That could be me. I could be in that position. It's just the mercy of God that's kept me from being in that position. But when you think, well, of course, I'm in this position because I'm just smarter than everybody else. I'm a better business person. I make better decisions. Then we look with disdain at other people. And so the washing of the feet thing had fallen down, and Jesus is reprimanding them for it, because uh, we can get too inflated of an opinion of ourselves. But as long as we really see who we really are and what sinners we are, and how it's the mercy of God that has kept us, then we see others that same way. We don't see ourselves as better than other, and God's life and his love can flow through us. But the Bible's talking about shutting up the bowels of compassion. We shut up our bowels. It's being anal retentive. We're anal retentive. But when you understand who you are, you just are a more loving person toward other people. You don't look on them with this despising eye. So when Joseph brought these people into his house and he's washing their feet, symbolically he is saying, you are welcome. We esteem you in my home. We're now, ironically, that wasn't what he was thinking. It was the tradition. That's what the tradition was supposed to mean. But Joseph, this was Simon Peter. Joseph was really thinking, these people, they tried to kill me, but he still did the tradition, right? So he washes their feet, and then it says in verse 25, then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, like he's coming at noon. So we have all this money, we have all this stuff, we'll give it to him, and then hopefully he won't kill us. For they heard that they would eat bread there. Now it says, when Joseph came home in verse 26, they brought him the present which was in their hands into the house, and they bowed down before him to the earth. So again, this is triggering that dream. Remember in Genesis 37:7, it says, when Joseph told him the dream that got him in trouble, there we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. God showed him that in advance so that he would recognize this moment and go, oh, God was behind all of this. And he wouldn't look on them and despise them the way he still does, because at any moment he could have said, hey, I'm Joseph. You sent me here ahead of you, and I love you, and I forgive you, and I'm just as much as big a sinner as you are, and I understand why you did what you did, and don't worry, it was all in God's hands, but he's looking on them like he's better than them. They're evil, and God's trying to break his heart. God's trying to break that part that is not understanding what's really going on. Now, he finally does, right? He cries 3 times, and it's after the 3rd cry that he finally goes, oh, I get it. You might have meant a bad thing by it, but God meant it for good. God was behind it. God wasn't sitting there going, oh no, look what happened. You better get revenge on them. God actually wanted all this to happen. And when we can look at a situation like that, oh, God wants this, that. This is not, and the person that's challenging you may have evil motives, etc. God didn't give them evil motives, but you're not ever in a situation that God has not gone before you and has some way out, some answer. So we don't have to be angry and upset. We can just stand back and go, okay, I know that person's upset, or I know this situation is bad, but God knows all about what's going on, and He's got a way out, and I'm just going to stay calm. But Joseph was not calm in the situation. He was angry with his brothers and had all this naturally built up anger in his heart, and God is making sure he hears certain things so that that callus that was on his heart that had been built up against his brother could finally break, right? So he asked them their well-being and said, is your father well? Because he doesn't know if the father's alive or not, and if they're lying or not. The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive? And they answered, your servant, our father, is in good health. He's still alive. And they bowed their heads down and they prostrated themselves. And it says, then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin. Now he had seen him again in the hall, in the palace, like you call it, like the banquet hall, but the big palace. But now he sees him up close. His mother's son, and he said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Now his heart yearned for his brother. This word yearning is a type of yearning when you love but can't have. For example, remember when the two women had brought the child to Solomon? And one had a story. She says, we lived in the same house. I had a baby. And then 3 days later, she had a baby. She accidentally laid on top of her baby and smothered her baby. But while I was sleeping, she switched the babies. And now I've got the dead one. She's got the live one. And they're both claiming, no, this one is alive. So Solomon says, okay, here's the answer. We'll just cut the live baby in two, and then you'll both get half a baby. Yeah. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 26, it says, then the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, for she yearned with compassion for her son. Meaning she's loving her son, but she's realizing she can't have him. Like, this is not going to work out. And it's that yearning. It's not she loved her son, but it's that heart, it's that longing after something that you can't have, because she realized this is not the answer. So she said, oh my Lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him. Like, you can have her. So I love my child, but I can't have him. And that's what Joseph is feeling for his brother. I love my brother, but I can't have it. Now, this is a story that he's told himself, because he thinks he's not supposed to reveal himself, that God has them there to punish the brothers. So I can't tell them who I am. So, at least I know he's alive, but I can't have him. Okay, so it says, so Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to cry. So this is the second time God has broken his heart. And he went into his chamber and he wept there. Why is he crying this time? So let's remind you of the first time. The first time he cried, because there's 3 times that Joseph cries. Each time God is breaking something in him that we similarly have in us. So the first time, remember that Joseph heard for the first time that his brothers actually heard his cries. When they kidnapped him and they threw him, they sat down near him and ate while he screamed out. And they did not answer. We think sometimes we're crying out to God and he hears us, but he's not going to answer. And we just develop a callous. Well, you can cry out to God. Sometimes you can just cry out to God and God says, sorry. And that he just kind of numbs himself. So God sees all this pain I'm going through. It's not that we don't believe in him. We believe he hears, but we just believe that he must be numb to our pain. And so Joseph is thinking that because they didn't hear me. They did not hear my pain. And that's how God is. I've been in pain since I was in the well. God sees me, didn't deliver me. I was in pain at Potiphar's house. God saw me, didn't deliver me. I was put in prison. God saw me, didn't deliver me. I'm here in Egypt. God, and so he developed this whole idea. God's not really hearing my pain. But they said in Genesis 42, chapter Genesis chapter 42, verse 21, he says, then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. We did hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, did not I speak to you, saying, don't sin against this boy, and you would not listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter, and he turned himself away from them and wept, because he's hearing, oh my God, when I was pleading, they actually did hear, and they do feel my pain, and they do feel sorry for it, and oh, this is happening to, and they do understand you, and they don't even know it's me. They're actually feeling compassion for this Joseph. They're realizing we made a mistake and we should have done something, and that changed him, because he grew up in a world where, oh, my brother's people who are supposed to love me the most, they don't care. Oh, they do care. And he's crying and he's weeping. So that was the first time. Second time, he sees his brother and he realizes that he's alive. Here's another lie that we tell ourselves. God's going to take away what I love and give me a future that I don't want. God's going to take away, this is important to me, and that's important to me, and this is important to me, and God's going to take that away and give me something that I don't want, because I wanted to do this, or I wanted to have that, or that car. I had to give up that car. I had to give up that house. I had to give up that job. I had to give up this, to give up that, and now God is going to give me something that I'm not going to really love, but I'm stuck with it because God's in charge. God doesn't preserve the things that are important to me. We're kind of stuck with what God gives us, and we just have to learn to be grateful. So, because he's sure that his brother is dead. That's the only thing he loved in the world. Once his mother was dead, all he had was his brother. Those 6 brothers had one mother. Those 2 brothers had another brother. Those 3 brothers, but all he had was this brother. They each had their mother still alive. His mother was dead. So, other than his father, all he had was his brother, and he was sure God had let that brother die. So to find out that God had preserved his brother and allowed him to see him, God does care about the things that are important to us. God is not going to give me some future that I'm going to just have to put up with. He actually, in my future, is the thing that I love. God is smarter than me. He's giving me the future that's best for me, but also preserving what I love too. He's allowing both things to happen. And so, oh my God, even though I'm stuck in Egypt, and in his mind he's stuck in Egypt, I still get to find out that my brother's alive, that God saved him, he preserved him. He does care about what's important to me. So he's crying. Then Genesis 43:31 says, then he washed his face and came out, and he restrained himself and said, okay, serve the bread. So this is a second thing about God that was broken. Okay, God does love me. He does care about the things that are important to me. God does know my heart. All right, but I'm still stuck here in Egypt, and I'm never gonna tell these people who I am. So he says they set him a place by himself, Joseph by himself, and then by themselves. So this they is the servants, the Egyptians. Joseph, you eat by yourself because you're in the priestly class and we're your servants. You can't eat with us. Those Hebrews are not Egyptians. They can't eat with us. And the Egyptians ate by themselves because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. Why? Why is it just we hate them so much? It's because they eat totally different foods. What the Egyptians eat and what the Hebrews eat, they consider each other what they're eating as an abomination. When Moses, and we're going to get to the book of Exodus, in the book of Exodus, Moses goes down to Pharaoh and says, God says, let my people go. We want to go 3 days journey into the wilderness. And he says, no. And so one of the times he says, God's going to have a swarm of flies. And we just hate one fly in your house. Oh, there's one fly in here. And you get out that. You imagine hundreds of thousands swarming all around your food and all around you for long periods of time. We'd go out of our minds. But he's going to only be on the Egyptians. And when they look over in Goshen, where no flies. Just so God, I want you to know I treat them differently. God's saying, I want Pharaoh to know this is not a coincidence. I treat people who obey me differently. So after that was done, it says, then Pharaoh called for Moses in Exodus 8:25 and Aaron and said, okay, go sacrifice to your God in the land. And Moses says, but in the land, meaning in Egypt, if you have to sacrifice, do it here. And Moses says, it's not right to do so, for we would be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord your God. If we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, then won't they stone us, right? So let us go 3 days journey into the wilderness and sacrifice the Lord as God, our God, as He will command us. The Egyptians worshipped Isis. You couldn't kill a cow, right? Isis was holy. The Thebes believed that sheep were holy. You couldn't slaughter them and eat them and kill them, and you couldn't. One other thing that the Egyptians, there was three different things, goats, and all of these things the Israelites sacrificed and then ate. They loved them some beef and some lamb and lamb chops and all that. And so if we in front of them sacrifice and then eat, the Egyptians will try to kill us because they think all those things are holy, and we can't sacrifice what they want us to sacrifice to God because God has told us what to sacrifice. And we have to be careful because the world will tell you what to sacrifice to God. And God's not, I'm not accepting that. I've told you what I want from you. Don't give me what the world tells you. Well, you can give this, you can give that. That's what they've decided is holy, but I've told you what is holy and what I want from you. Right? See, the arrow of Cain. Thank you. You can't come up with your own works and says, well, God will accept this. He tells us what He wants from us, and it's a sacrifice. That's the whole point. We think, oh, I have to do that. Yes. I have to give up more time. Yeah, whatever it is, God speaks to us personally, tells us what we have to sacrifice, and whatever He's told us to sacrifice, you can't substitute it. God won't accept it. So Moses is telling Pharaoh, we can't. What the Egyptians want us to sacrifice to God, we can't do that. And what we want to sacrifice to God, you're going to go crazy. So let us go 3 days journey and come back. And Pharaoh could have said yes at any point. Can't wait to get to Exodus. It's obviously next, Genesis, Exodus, because it's so good. Well, and to me, like all the Bible books of the Bible, really good. When you study them, you go, oh my God, this story is actually really interesting. So they had them all eat separately because the Hebrews were going to be eating some cow and some lamb, and the Egyptians were going to eat whatever they eat, and Joseph couldn't eat. So they're all eating separately, right? Because they knew what the Hebrews wanted to eat. And we don't want to see you eating no beef. Okay. And they sat before him. But here's the order. This is how they served and sat them. The firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. So Reuben sat first, then Reuben, then Simeon and Levi, then Judah, and then they're all sitting in order. And Benjamin's life. And it says, and the men looked in astonishment, like, what, like, how do they know who the oldest and who the youngest is? Because some of those kids were born just like 9 months apart. So they don't look that differently now that they're in their 30s and 40s. They don't look that different. Or 50s and 60s. You know, you can't tell someone who's 51 from somebody who's 50. They look the same. So how do they know which one of us is the oldest or the other? But Joseph had told them how to seat them. And actually they think that man he's a seer. He's incredible. That just made them more in awe of Joseph. They didn't ever go, is that Joseph? They didn't incur it. Joseph has been dead in their minds. So then he took servings to them from before him. But Benjamin, his serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. He gave them, because I'm going to feed this boy because I'm sending them away. And I'm going to, while he's here, I'm going to just double feed him, right? But he's not thinking Benjamin is staying at this point. I got to see Benjamin and I'm happy, but God has me here in Egypt. I'm supposed to stay in Egypt because they put on this robe. And we're going to talk eventually again about Joseph taking on whatever clothes were put on him. That became his personality. So God kept stripping him and stripping him. So he learned, no, that's a temporary thing. But now that I'm dressed in the robes of Egypt, I'm supposed to stay here. So I'm never going to see Benjamin again. So let me feed him a bunch. Now, it is very significant. How much time do I have left? Good. Very significant that Joseph is feeding Benjamin. This is a story God is weaving. The things that happen to different tribes, there's a story in it. The things that happens to Judah and his descendants, the things that happen to Benjamin, to Joseph, and their descendants, God is painting a story. So Joseph, whose sons were Ephraim and Manasseh, he's serving Benjamin all this food, right? So let me tell you a story. Well, no, let me read from the Bible. In 1 Samuel, God has come to Samuel, who's a prophet. He's not a priest, he's not a Levite, and that's very controversial, but he's a prophet, and so he's doing some things that look like a Levite might do them, like a priest might do them. But he's a prophet, and God comes to him and tells him about Saul. Saul is coming. I want you to prepare food for him and all this stuff. And this is before Saul was ever king. So when Samuel saw Saul, this is 1 Samuel 9, verse 17. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said to him, "There he is, the man of whom I spoke to you." Never seen him before. "This one shall reign over my people." Okay, he's going to be king. Okay. Then Saul drew near to Samuel in the gate and said, "Please tell me, where is the seer's house?" So God has spoken to Saul and said, "You need to find the prophet, the seer. He's going to help you find your donkeys." So his donkeys were lost. Turns out that was God that his donkeys were lost. Sometimes your keys are lost, or sometimes, and you think, "Oh man, I was looking for them for an hour and I couldn't find." I wonder if there's a purpose in that. Why are my keys lost? Why is this? It could be I need to learn a lesson to put my keys in the basket when I walk in the door, or there could be some other purpose, because is God trying to show me something else? You always want to ask, is there some lesson in this? His donkeys were lost, so they said, "Go to the seer." So he says, "I'm looking for the seer." And Samuel answered Saul and said, "I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place where you shall eat with me today." And the high places where all the prophets lived, right? "You eat with me today, and tomorrow I will let you go, and I will tell you all that is in your heart." Really? And listen, God will give you a word of wisdom or a word of knowledge, and you will know. God will tell you something about somebody because he wants you to confirm it to them. You're going to tell them what's in their heart. Sometimes you might have an experience, and I just feel like I need to say this to you, blah, 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 blah. And the person will say, "You know what, I had a dream," or "I was thinking that," or, and it's a confirmation for them that what was in their heart is from God. So that's why sometimes God will tell you, go over to that person and say this to them. And I don't know why, I just feel like I have to tell you this. And you tell them, so he says, "I'm going to tell you tomorrow all that's in your heart," because God had been speaking to Saul, but there's a specific reason why Saul wasn't believing God. So we'll find out in a second. Now, who's Samuel? What's his descendants? Samuel chapter 1, verse 1 says, "Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim." Okay, come up with some names now. "Of the mountains of Ephraim." Ephraim is Joseph's son, his second son, the one that ascended over the first one, right? So this man lived in the town of Ephraim. And his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeropham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. So he's establishing Elkanah is an Ephraimite. His great-great-grandfather was an Ephraimite. He came from Joseph's line. And he had two wives. The name of one was Hannah. The name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And she went to the temple, she prayed, and God says, "Okay, I'm going to give you a son. It's going to be Samuel. And he'll serve me in the temple," etc., which was news to them. Like, really? Because he's not a Levite. He's an Ephraimite. And so Samuel is from Joseph's line. So Saul comes up to Samuel and says, Samuel comes up to Saul and says, "God sent me to you, and I'm going to feed you." Verse 20 says, "But as for your donkeys that were lost 3 days ago that you've been worried about, do not be anxious about them, for they have been found." God was just simply delaying you for 3 days so we can run into each other. "And on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on you and on all your father's house?" Like there's an appointment for you. I'm from the line of Joseph, and I am explaining this to you. And Saul answered and said, "Am I not a Benjamite?" So you've got someone from Joseph who's coming up to this Benjamite, and of the smallest of the tribes of Israel. And my family, the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin. And we will find out in a couple weeks why his family was the smallest of all the tribes of Israel. What happened to them? What horrible genocide happened to so that they were the smallest of all the tribes? "Why didn't you speak to me like this?" Now Samuel took Saul, from the line of Joseph to the guy from the line of Benjamin, and he brought them into the hall and had them sit in the place of honor among those who were invited. which is exactly what Joseph did to Benjamin. He sat him in the seat of honor and gave him all this food. Joseph did to Benjamin. Samuel, the son of Joseph, is doing to this Benjamite, this Saul, and had him sit in place of honor among all those who were invited. There were about 30 persons. And Samuel said to the cook, bring the portion which I gave you, which I said to you, set it apart. Bring that big portion. So the cook took up the thigh with its upper part, the leg and all that was attached to it. I'm like made him the big piece of meat. And set it before Saul. And Samuel said, here it is, what was kept back. It was set apart for you. Eat, for until this time it has been kept for you, since I said I invited the people. So Saul ate with Samuel that day. So he's painting a picture on purpose. Joseph is feeding this Benjamite all this food and giving him the place of honor, because years later, when it comes down to figuring out who is the king and who is not the king and who's supposed to do what, this son of Joseph is going to anoint the son of Benjamite king. But who ends up being king after Saul? David, who's the son of Judah. That's who God is choosing. So Joseph chose Benjamin to heap all this praise on, just like Jacob chose Joseph to heap all this praise on. Sitting over there to the right is Judah, who God has chosen. And sometimes we heap all this praise on our choice. And sitting over there to the right is the person God has chosen. Please know that our choice may reign for a while, but God's choice will reign forever. So God paints these pictures on purpose and repeats them. He repeats them all throughout the Bible so that we recognize it when it happens. Oh, look, that's God doing that thing again. So that's why some things happen 3 days, some things happen 7 days. Sometimes there's 12 sons and there's 12 disciples, because God's wanting you to recognize, this is me. I want you to not to be confused and not be able to stand before me and say, I did not know. Yes, you did. I did it. I did 15 times the very same way. So you would recognize it. So that's why God repeats certain themes in our lives, so that we'll recognize this must be God. This keeps happening. My car keeps breaking down on the way to see that woman. Maybe I should stop going, because this is a theme. Because every time I do this, this bad thing happens. I wonder why. Oh, I know. I'll just keep doing it again. No, God's he's making it happen the same way every time. It's falling apart every time. Or you're blessed. It's weird. Every time I give money to that person, I get blessed the next day. Isn't that weird? No, it's not weird. God's being repetitive on purpose. So you go, oh, that must be God. So he does things. It's fantastic. When you really read through the Bible, you get to see, look how repetitive God is on purpose, so that we'll recognize him. So I will stop today with the second tears of Joseph. And then next week, the third time Joseph cries, and finally his eyes are open. He goes, oh, now I see what God, and hopefully with all of us, our eyes will finally be open and we'll see what it is that God is doing in our lives. So thank you so much for tuning in again today. And I'll see some of you on Wednesdays when we're going through John. We're just starting John. We're in 1 John chapter, not in 1 John. We're in John, the first chapter. And save, and God bless you.